is there more that I could know about what I'm doing out on the track? Like, I feel like I'm totally just winging it here, compared to the way that it was approaching it.
But there was no setting or algorithm for like how big of balls that the AV could have, right?
How much you
could push it.
Yeah. They had not quite factored that in.
I assume he kept receipts and you've paid him back, right?
We actually do have an agreement where I have not actually paid that fund out to my dad, but there is a faction of my LLC that is, partially a reimbursement kind of thing.
Tell you what, I've done a lot for old Matt.
What have you done? What have you done?
Maybe I haven't done that much for Matt. I don't know. Welcome to Oil and Whiskey, an Ironclad original. Today's guest is IndyCar Series Pro JR Hildebrand, who drives for the number 11 Chevrolet for AJ Foyt Enterprises. I was going good and I fucked it up. JR also serves as an adjunct lecturer on autonomous vehicle research at Stanford University's School of Engineering Revs program. You can learn more about JR on his Instagram at JR Hildebrand and at jrhildebrandracing.com. JR, welcome to Oil and Whiskey.
Stoked to be here, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Dude, pleasure to have you. We appreciate you cutting the time out to join us.
Be honest.
Absolutely.
Knew about your car enthusiasm and knew about a little bit about your racing career. And then 5 minutes prior to starting this, read the show notes and saw that you were a lecturer at Stanford and kind of got a little nervous. Thought you were just a race car driver. This dude's fucking smart.
Yeah. Now you're nervous, right?
It's probably a little overblown. It's not like I'm not sitting in any classrooms lecturing in front of a big group of kids or something. But have had like the awesome opportunity to go out there and basically just play around. There's a group, the Revs program at Stanford has been working for years on really specific autonomous vehicle stuff. So they have track cars that are just running laps around Thunder Hill out in Northern California. They've developed a couple of drift cars. So my role it was actually super fun. I got brought in initially just to be the human that they compared the data of the autonomous car against. So my only job was just to stand up for all of us us non-robotic, beings and go rip a lap time that was going to beat the AV, which I can say I'm still faster than the autonomous vehicles. But it really actually ended up turning into a really fun thing to go do, to learn on my end a little bit more about what was going on in that space. But ultimately just to hang out with anything like that, just to go hang out with a bunch of really smart young guys and gals, doing some cool things.
Does the AI have to learn the track, and does it learn as fast as a human learns a track?
So it's interesting. It's been a couple of years since I've worked with any of their cars that go do, track day stuff, but they have it like there's no human input in terms of so there's no cheating. Basically, there's no, tweaking from the students or me or anybody else to make the car go any faster than it would go on its own. So basically they go out and one of the students will drive the car around the furthest leftmost edge of the track and the rightmost edge of the track. So that basically establishes for the car, like, this is the domain of space that you're allowed to use. And so honestly, like, when I get in it, I'm using a little more road than they allow the AV to use. But it figures out its own racing line. So it kind of has an algorithm and a program that it runs to decide what it thinks the fastest racing line is. It'll allow itself to vary a little bit from that, probably less. I mean, that was one of the things that when I first got there that I immediately recognized is I'm adhering to what I think the best racing line is, actually a lot less than what their car was doing. Basically, just because you get on a track, especially the car that they were using at the time was an Audi TT RS, so 4-wheel drive, kind of small sports car. But because the 4-wheel drive and everything else, like, I was relying a lot more just on the behavior of the car through the corner. Like, I don't really care that I'm within an inch in the middle of the corner of exactly where I need to be, I'm manipulating the pedals and kind of making sure that I just have the car at the attitude that I want, basically, and prioritizing that a lot more. So the car, I guess the short answer is it figures everything out on its own. It has its own input strategy. It has its own, I mean, the thing has like military grade GPS. I mean, it knows within a couple of millimeters exactly where it is on the track. It can make, probably thousands more adjustments than I would, in terms of no, really, it's interesting. I mean, you really end up realizing with these things how much information it has about every little thing that it's doing, and can kind of use that to figure things out, maybe certainly in a different way than I do. It made me think like, man, is there more that I could know about what I'm doing out on the track? Like, I feel like I'm totally just winging it here, compared to the way that it was approaching it. But
there was no setting or algorithm for like how big of balls that the AV can have, right?
How much you can push it.
Yeah.
They had not quite factored that in. So, maybe that was one of my lasting influences on it. Yeah, for sure. Initially, it was an advantage. Yeah.
On the GPS side, I wonder what happens when that goes wrong. Like, an iPhone, you're driving along, and all of a sudden it puts you like above a highway, or it puts you like over the ocean, right?
They probably have a little bit better satellite link.
Well,
than what we're able to
sometimes things go south. Were there any little mishaps out there?
I never experienced any mishaps. There have obviously been plenty of mishaps in this, general space, which is maybe a whole nother conversation. But, I mean, just to zoom out a little bit on the autonomous vehicle thing, it is very interesting. Like, I think the experience that I had in this very controlled environment, where these guys are developing a car that is not being designed to do a lot of the things that it would need to do if you just drove it out. Like, if you drove it off the racetrack, it wouldn't like know what to do, right? And that's on purpose. Like, we're jamming all the compute, all the energy just to try to get it to go as fast as it can on this track for a lap. Even just it doing that and realizing how different it was, it was kind of being programmed to approach doing that. Like, it was being programmed to approach building the fastest lap time by being able to know all of this stuff about the surface it's on, the track it is, where exactly it is on the track, and as a human, you perceive a lot of those things. Like, you're using your eyes and your senses and whatever to kind of roughly gauge where you're at and all of these things. But I don't know exactly how much brake pressure I'm applying at the exact spot for this corner lap after lap. Like, you're treating all of those things with a little fuzzy edge around them and kind of adapting a lot, along the way. And I think that's I found that to be sort of an interesting little microcosm of some of the crazy things that are happening with AVs out in the world. There's been Cruise has been in the news a lot lately for some accidents and incidents they've had in San Francisco, and blah blah blah. And it's kind of like, well, if these things are being designed to operate in a world that they can know everything about, then that's never going to happen. Like, you're interacting with millions of humans, whether in other cars or walking on the street or as a bicyclist or whatever. So it's definitely, it's a pretty wild, it's a wild thing that's even happening in our really generation here anyway. But,
you see an
interesting thing to get a little insight into.
Any of that technology potentially in the next 10, 15 years of being any type of benefit to a race team to utilize that for any type of testing or learning, anything like that, short of, just putting a driver in and think, I don't know. It's
probably just like the shot guy that doesn't want the driver to tell him what the car is doing wrong.
Oh.
What's an actual? Yeah. He's like, I'm the fucking computer. I'll tell me exactly. So I'm not listening to this guy.
That's definitely a thing already. There's a form of this which has existed in motorsports for some period of time already, which is just simulation, basically. Right. So, not necessarily it actually manifesting itself as an autonomous vehicle on track, but basically as good as that, like essentially an autonomous vehicle in a digital or, virtual environment. And so I'm already up against, an engineer that wants to rely really heavily on what the sim guy says, how fast you can go through this corner. But the simulation tools are insane, and it's kind of the way that we use them, the way that the teams use them. And this is true across all of motorsports at this point. It used to be maybe just an F1 thing. IndyCar, the IndyCar manufacturers. So in our part of the world, and this is the same for NASCAR, and because we share a lot of the same equipment, because some of the manufacturers, across Chevrolet, I guess, on the GM side,
Right.
is in both places. We use the same simulator that the Chevy NASCAR teams use. So we're splitting use of that thing. They'll put the IndyCar chassis buck on it when we're going to use it. They put the NASCAR chassis buck on it when those guys use it. But it's the same kind of basic setup and machine. That basically you have simulation that the engineers back at the shop are doing that uses a lot of the same programming, that doesn't have the actual race car driver in the loop. So it's just an automated program based on, data, basically a derivative of data that they have from that track from a real race car driver. But then it kind of extrapolates out like, all right, well, if our, real data showed that you could carry this much lateral force through this corner once, then probably carry that much lateral force through every corner at this track in that same realm of speed and blah, blah, blah. So it kind of extrapolates what's possible. The engineers will do a lot of the engineering development in that environment. Then we'll take kind of, the whole team basically will take what they think that they've kind of extracted out of that in terms of ways that you can make the car faster without, the beauty for the engineers of having that simulation environment is that the driver isn't changing, right? So you take the driver out as a variable. You can try, all right, if we make this damper change, if we make this spring change, if we run this roll center, whatever, like how does that affect the performance of the car when the driver is not a variable? Then we'll go to the physical simulator where the driver then gets in the loop, go through all of those same adjustments, see what the driver has to say, because they're inevitably end up being things that might be faster, but are just not realistic for the driver to actually extract that performance out of it. Maybe they make the car super twitchy or something that, or that a particular driver is not gonna, their driving style doesn't lend it to, getting that performance. And then you're going to the track or going to a test day and doing all of that stuff in real life. So you kind of have this triangle of pieces that there is a little bit of that, autonomous component of it built into that. There's unquestionably a huge amount of just virtual environment work that's going on because we're so limited in terms of how much track time you get, how many test days you get over the course of the year. It puts a real emphasis on what can you do without actually going and driving the car.
The whole sim thing's wild. I wonder what was the era? What year? How long ago was it? When that went from being like, okay, this is a really good video game with great graphics to like, all right, we can make this a full blown simulation that this can be utilized by a race team. How long has that been?
I think it's probably 15 years ago now, more or less. So a few of the F1 teams, now every F1 team has their own simulator, right? And any big manufacturer that's involved in racing, probably of almost any kind, has their own big simulator. So F1's really the only place where the specific teams have their own. They're almost like manufacturers though, right? Like they're their own constructors. That's kind of the only place across motorsports that's the case either. So right. It sort of, makes sense that that's what it is. The experience that I have with it started, we used to, when I was go-karting and coming up through the ranks, like you'd try to find a realistic-ish video game to go learn a track or, do this or that. But to your point, that was the early 2000s. Nothing like it is now. I raced, I kind of came up through the open wheel ranks in the US, had done a little bit of racing in Europe, but always just kind of in the off season or sort of a one-off thing here or there to go do a couple of races or whatever. I worked my way up, won the Indy Lights Championship in 2009, which is kind of our AAA, like, running Xfinity or whatever. Won that championship with the Andretti's that year. Even at that time, that was yeah, I mean, whatever. So that was 15 years ago, basically. I mean, that was a car that you still had to lift to, it was a sequential box, but you still had to lift a shift. There was no paddle shift stuff. I mean, it was a radio button on the steering wheel. Like there was no crazy, you know, um, unrefined by today's standards, not super complicated, a fun car to drive actually, because it was pretty raw. But, I went from that. At the end of that season, I had tested the IndyCar a couple of times. There was no simulator stuff on our side of the pond at that point. I ended up getting kind of grouped in with a number of junior Formula champions in Europe or from other parts of the world in this sort of shootout, basically, that the Force India Formula One team, which is now Aston Martin, has gone through some various iterations, but same core team, same building, all that kind of stuff as it was back then, was going to put on. So, and that's actually a whole another sort of crazy story, how I even got involved in that revolved around meeting the guy that took care of the Indian owner, billionaire owner's car collection in my hometown of Sausalito, California, chasing this guy down in a 427 Cobra to see where he was trying to go after a car show, and ended up finding this warehouse full of this car collection, or part of this guy's car collection, because he owned the local newspaper or some crazy like coincidental thing. But I ended up getting on this guy's radar, getting included because I won the Indy Lights Championship. And that basically that team, as a Formula One team, didn't have their own simulator stood up at that time, but they had a technical partnership with the McLaren Mercedes team, which was one of the first to develop like one of these crazy simulators. And so even back in 2009, when not every F1 team had them, and this was like, you couldn't be found outside of Formula One, the McLaren simulator was totally legit at that point. Like it was wraparound screen that you'd put 3D glasses on to, get the depth perception of it was a full, Formula One chassis that moved basically. I mean, and it's proven to remain like this for a lot of simulators. You see these like big hexapod things where they're moving around all over the place. The struggle with a lot of those, and I think why a lot of F1 teams have gone away from them, is because you get a lot of motion, but in an open wheel car, especially in an F1 car, it's slower than you could ever. You couldn't possibly get a big thing like that to move as fast.
G-force, right? You can't simulate the G-force.
Yeah, and so even McLaren at that time was like, we're not going to try to do anything. We're not going to give you any cueing for things that we don't feel like we can give you an accurate like cue for. So it didn't move. It wasn't like this huge warehouse that this thing's moving around all over the place. It was just moving really quickly, but not that much. But I got in that thing, and I mean, it was just I ended up being one of the two fastest guys in the simulator. And so myself and Paul DiResta, who was a Mercedes kind of factory young driver, he ended up in the race seat a couple of years later with that team. He and I ended up splitting time in the 3-day test in the F1 car out of that. And it's always interesting to me. So I think that's kind of around the point at which, like within a couple of years, every F1 team had something like that, but that was kind of the crossover point.
It's really interesting. I was going to ask you that, is how much in today's day and age are they using that to gauge talent as people are coming up through the ranks of putting them in a simulator? And it's obviously way cheaper than getting a guy out there and wad a car up. But I mean, are they doing that?
Gran Turismo movie.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're doing that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the movie.
Well, and honestly, it's a crazy thing now, because the short answer is yes, absolutely. They're doing that. I think they're probably doing that at some level for like Cup teams and IndyCar teams and all that kind of stuff. Like we could argue about whether it's how realistic and how much does it really translate exactly to. I mean, I've had kind of experiences on both sides of that, but
using it as a level of measure, if you've got other drivers that you're paying right now,
it definitely factors in. And then on top of that, it's become a part of like the young driver ladder, basically, for guys to really develop a lot of totally relevant skill to sort of maybe leapfrog the expense of having to do that in a real race car at a real racetrack. Because I mean, I can speak certainly for the open wheel ladder. It's, I mean, I mean, I guess it's just simple to say, like, it's going to cost you 250 grand or something to do the lowest rung on the ladder, and so that all by itself is just a total deal breaker for, kids coming out of karting. Like, there's a huge jump in the expense of pursuing that dream immediately now. I mean, it wasn't when I was coming up through it, like, you could get a couple of rungs up before it was like, okay, you got to go find a sponsor, or you require having some family money that's expendable to go really take this on. So in a way, it's great because of that the virtual stuff is as advanced as it is, because I've definitely seen some young guys that didn't do a lot of in-person, like, real racing, but did a lot of simulator work and got into a car at a pretty high level and were really fast.
What does that look like typically? Like, if you're climbing that ladder and you're driving a physical car, a kid starts off in a go-kart, is it you progress to a sprint car, open wheel? How does that look like before you get to that stage of getting in an Indy car?
I think it's every generation, it's a little bit different. Where it splits off from, open wheel to sports cars to, stock car stuff, open wheel and NASCAR will say I have always been pretty separate pretty early on. You see a lot of, like, Harvick's kids and, a lot of the NASCAR guys, they've got their kids running go-karts. So, now I think it's fairly common that you're actually doing road racing in karting as kind of one of those early steps, just because there's so little dirt stuff at a professional level. And that even, like, NASCAR is migrating towards a lot more road courses. Like, that's a bigger part of the overall kind of equation now. But, starting out either in go-karts or quarter midgets, or if I was, I've got an 8-month-old here at home. If I was mapping out a career path for her, I'd say you just do both. But that's, karting. And then on the open wheel side of it, you used to transition through a school series usually. So Skip Barber, the Jim Russell Drivers School, all of those schools had their own championships. Some of them were kind of regional, like you'd only be at one track maybe and just run all the various configurations of that track over the course of the year or whatever. Skip Barber was the one when I was coming up through all of it that, traveled around the country and you could run the national championship and all that kind of stuff. But relatively inexpensive because the cars aren't super fast, and sometimes they're even running on street rubber or something like that. But with coaching and instruction as a built-in part of making that transition, I'm a huge fan of that personally. Like, I think that's it again, just it's having that layer of instruction and learning kind of built in, as opposed to you having to fend for yourself right away. But you will typically go through a series like that when you transition from go-karts to cars. And then, in the IndyCar side, there's, what's called the Road to Indy. So you run like Formula Ford 2000, then the US Pro 2000, which is a little bit faster than that. These are all, carbon fiber chassis, wings and slicks, open wheel cars now. Indy Lights is sort of the last rung on that ladder than IndyCar. So, that's a little bit like coming up through ARCA trucks, Xfinity, NASCAR in Europe. You're running Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 1 is kind of the route there. And, there's a lot of open wheel. It's typical if your end game is either open wheel like F1 or IndyCar, but you're open to sports car racing, or even frankly, if you start out thinking that you want to get into sports car racing, like road course sports car racing, whether that be GT or prototype, you'll typically follow the open wheel ladder kind of as far through it as you can get, because that's just where it's the most stacked in terms of talent. The big factory, Porsches and BMWs of the world are hunting for their young guys in the open wheel ladders in both Europe and the United States. So that's fairly typical to follow those all the way up.
So is it possible in today's day and age for a kid who's a rock star sim racer to bypass a good portion of those steps, like maybe never got in a kart, lands himself?
Yeah,
can you land yourself in an IndyCar? I mean, is that feasible?
I think that's a stretch probably, but to leapfrog, I think you could bypass karting for sure and be a rung or two up on that ladder. I mean, I think
Wow.
sort of the,
That's cool.
I mean, because I think certainly on the NASCAR side, like you could get in an ARCA car probably, and if you'd have done enough of it and you were actually really good, I mean, obviously all of it just depends on you having the predisposition to genuinely be really legit. But if you took, I guess to put it a different way, if you took guys that have ended up being really successful at the highest levels, you could have kind of manipulated the beginning of their careers probably to be on either side of that. And they would have developed the requisite skill along with their just natural talent to be able to jump in at, somewhere in the middle and work their way up from there. I think that's at least, that doesn't feel, I don't know that I'd say that that's the best way to do it, but I don't think that that's unrealistic to say that it's doable.
That's wild, man. I mean, I might be past my prime now, but
I would say so.
When
I would definitely say so.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. But dude, as a kid, I could rip in Cruising USA, right? I'd carry speed through.
It's not really
the double stomp
through
on
the
throttle pedal wheelies.
Yeah. I'd come through the redwood forest like nobody you've ever seen. And I'm just wondering if that could have been like, I never got discovered, right? Nobody ever.
The big problem in our simulator was the clamp-on steering wheel kept coming loose from the TV dinner tray.
I was talking about like the full-blown arcade.
Oh,
like Dave and Buster's,
Well, I mean, it's a good segue. How did you get your start?
Yeah, I mean,
you seem like you're very extremely intelligent, obviously, and
that.
obviously very talented behind the wheel. So I'm interested in seeing how you got smart along the way, and
and we're dumb enough to stay with cars.
Yeah, that's really the question, isn't it? Right. I got into MIT out of high school and didn't go, and so I always tell people like, wow. I think that actually says the opposite about me of what you initially think, which is that I was stupid enough not to go to MIT and do this instead. But I actually started racing by today's standards kind of late. So I didn't start actually racing like my first full season of racing go-karts, I was 14, which to the average person sounds super young, and it is. But I mean, most guys that I ended up racing against that were my age coming up, they'd
6, 7, 8 years old
from they were like, 7 or 8. I mean, I was playing T-ball or something.
What part of the country was this?
Northern California. So I grew up in the Bay Area.
What made you want to do it at 14? You're just like, I want to go racing.
My dad had vintage race cars from when I was a kid. So it was always just a hobby for him, but he had a 68 Camaro that was a sedan car. So it was a race car from when it was new. He bought it when I was like early 90s. So it was always just a vintage racing thing for him. He never, pursued it professionally and always had cars that were kind of like that. But his first car was that 68. It did SECA hill climbs. So I guess the point is it never actually raced in a Trans Am race, but it was of that spec basically. So 302, Corvette brakes, all the stuff. And so I grew up going, in Northern California, I don't think or that part of Northern California especially is maybe not really thought of as like a hotbed for where race car drivers come from. But you've got Sears Point in Sonoma that was 45 minutes away, Laguna, which was like an hour and a half. Growing up in the 90s, between those two places, you saw, you had Dale against Jeff Gordon at Sonoma every year. And then you had, Jimmy Vassar and Ryan Herta and like all the stars of kart during that era, IndyCar as it was then down at Laguna, and John Force doing, half pass burnouts. And like, it was an amazing era to be able to have, just to have season passes to the contemporary racing that was going on. We saw AMA bikes, like whatever you wanted to see, it was at one of those places. And then, my dad racing at the vintage races, 4, 6, 8 times a year, whatever, maybe racing at 1 or 2 other places up and down the West Coast, as it fit his schedule. And so he was racing in the Trans Am group up until there became a point when, as you guys probably know now, like all of the real deal Trans Am cars are in that group now. But back then it, wasn't quite the thing that it is today. So he raced in that group, and that was just a badass thing to kind of like see and be around. And he was, him and his brother were, his CPA at PricewaterhouseCoopers and, partner in San Francisco, but he and his brother like pissing the neighbors off, have the cops coming up to the house in Sausalito because they're setting the timing at like 2:00 in the morning, trying to get things sorted to go up to the track the next day. Mom's like, what the fuck is going on up there? And so it was just a cool, like I became sort of a gearhead because of that, right? Like going to the vintage races, you see the whole history of motorsport, laid out right in front of you. It's vintage F1 cars from the 20s and 30s to the 60s and 70s, and Trans Am and Can Am and all this stuff. You see, Parnelli Jones written on the door frame of like 30 different cars that are all different shapes and sizes and sounds and all this kind of stuff. And so I really attribute a lot of my just general interest in racing to all of that, to seeing the design evolution over time, to hear, and from especially during that kind of late 60s, early 70s era, all of the various types of cars that fit there, just this
badass
brute force.
It doesn't get much
power.
more badass than that.
It just doesn't, right? And so, that's still really near and dear to me. And, my dad's continued doing, I've raced against my dad now a couple of times, which is fun to kind of go full circle on that. But, to really where it all started for me was on that side of things. And that go-kart racing is tough because, everywhere across the country, there's a baseball field or a basketball court or whatever, like right down the street. There just wasn't somewhere super close for me to go do that. Actually, I played baseball competitively, like all the way through high school. So I kind of did like normal kid sports stuff for a long time. They ended up opening up the go-kart track at Sears Point when I was 13 going on 14. So I had driven go-karts a couple of times. Me and my dad had gone down to Ventura and done the Jim Hall school down there and some other stuff like that. But, it really started with having somewhere close by. And I was lucky basically for the Jim Russell Driver School was at Sears Point at that time. And the way that it was set up was like, if you won one of their karting championships, you'd get a 3-day school for free at the big track. If you did any of the 3-day schools, you could do the graduate runoffs at the end of the year. And I ended up winning that and got a full season in the big cars for my first year, transitioning out of go-karts into a full-size wings and slicks, proper open wheel car for free there. So it was kind of, I was able in a way that is almost not even a thing anymore. Back then, early kind of mid 2000s, I was able to get through those first few rungs on the ladder, showcasing that like, hey, this was worth spending the time and energy to try to figure out how to do without having to make that enormous upfront investment, which I think, for us and for my family and stuff made a big difference for sure.
What was the first kart chassis and motor?
Go-kart chassis?
Yeah.
I was actually on a, can you guys hear that? The dog?
No, you're good.
Okay. The first chassis that I was on, I raced a Track Magic, which was a, US brand. So you're always racing against like CRGs, Tony Karts, all that kind of stuff. I raced a Track Magic, just 125 Perilla, which was like they call it a tag. So like touch and go, single speed clutch kart was my first program.
At what point in the career does it get to a point where y'all got to start shelling out some big money, or you got to hit the streets and start getting some sponsors? Yeah.
For everybody that's different. For me, it was, I was lucky to get through after I won so I got in the Jim Russell Championship Series, won that. I got some dough to kind of go towards the next thing. That was not yet a leap that was super expensive, kind of like it is today. At that time it was like, $125K for a year to do that next thing. But that was starting to get in the realm of like, all right, $40 grand goes a long way to help me do that. But then you still got to come up with like a pretty good nut to do that, and then gets exponentially more expensive at that point. So I was fortunate both to, that my dad was, high enough up at his job and doing well enough and whatever that we could kind of support that inside the family for a little while, which I appreciate. Even to do it at that level, not everybody can pull off.
I assume he kept receipts and you've paid him back, right?
We actually do have an agreement where I have not actually paid that fund out to my dad, but there is a faction of my LLC that is, partially a reimbursement kind of thing.
IOUs on Post-it notes.
Yeah. There's a lot of IOUs. Exactly. But at that point, I guess I was also lucky that I was at that stage, one of I guess a lesser number of young American race car driver guys that was going in the open wheel direction as opposed to going towards NASCAR. And so, the mid 2000s open wheel racing in the US was not particularly healthy. Kart and what was then, it had turned into Champ Car at that point, and the IRL were separate, so it was just kind of a mess. And so I got a lot of support from almost like benefactors basically that wanted to see more young American guys succeed in open wheel, and maybe that was you race in the US for a while and we try to get you over to Europe and you go try your hand over there or whatever. But I got a lot of opportunities basically just by being among the best guys coming up through the open wheel ladder in the States that was in fact an American and not, somebody from South America or whatever else racing in the US. And so I got lucky that I had a few sponsors that jumped on board pretty quickly. When I got to the Indy Lights Championship, it was on TV. There was awesome prize money. When I ended up racing for the Andretti's, we, basically they, I guess, were willing to leverage the potential of accruing a lot of prize money over the course of the year to kind of subsidize my rides. So at no point nowadays you're having to look for like 7-figure sponsors before you ever even get to the promised land. When I was coming up through it, it was just nothing like that because you had all these kind of different factors that helped you counteract some of that craziness. So, just super fortunate to get to that point without having to shell out a lot of dough. And then I basically spent a year in racing purgatory, sort of like I won the Indy Lights Championship about as handily as you could. So it really didn't make sense for me to go back and do that again. Like that just seemed risky. Like I come back and do this again and not win. And then what? But there was no seats that opened up in the IndyCar Championship that next season. So I did some sports car racing, did some other stuff. I like to call myself a free agent. I was just, unemployed race car driver.
Free agent sounds cooler.
It sounded better at the time. And then, guy got hurt at Indianapolis that year. I filled in for a couple of races and then got hired full time by a different team, but kind of off the back of getting in the car, going pretty fast, and being in the window.
How does that work? Just jumping into an Indy car and hitting the track?
Yeah,
the nerves leading up to that, like that's kind of like the big stage, right? And
yeah, it's funny thinking back on it though that I just kind of felt like I had the feeling that like I was the fucking guy at that point. Like I was the guy that sort of had earned that next spot that was going to open up. And so, and that coming off of racing for a really good team in Indy Lights, I had driven the IndyCar a couple of times for Andretti. There was a thing during that period in IndyCar that if an IndyCar team gave an Indy Lights driver like half a day in the car for a test day, that one of their full-time guys would get an extra half a day. So there was kind of some incentive to give the young guys a shot in the car here and there. I ended up doing several days kind of because of that program.
The proper amount of confidence sometimes masks the nerves.
It's important.
Yeah. And so I had like, I just, I don't know. I felt ready for, I guess I knew I was as ready for it as I was going to be basically. And it just ended up turning out that the Indy Lights car to the IndyCar at that time, They were both built by Dallara. They were both kind of designed around the same time. You were running on Firestone tires on both. They had kind of similar powertrains. They were both just naturally aspirated V8s. So when I got in I remember the first few laps in the IndyCar the first time, you have a lot of those questions going through your mind of like, okay, is this just going to be super overwhelming or whatever? And it basically just did everything like the Indy Lights car, but a little better, kind of. And so that first day that I spent in the car, there was other IndyCar drivers that were there. We tested on the short course at Sebring. I was pretty immediate, like by lunchtime, I was just as fast as all the rest of the guys that were there. And, you're getting into the engineering program with the engineers and, as they say, you're kind of off to the races. I will say, in stark contrast to that, sort of before I had driven an IndyCar much, but had won the Indy Lights Championship, I went through that whole F1 simulator test, ended up getting the F1 test there. I mean, the difference between my one button on the steering wheel and getting in an F1 car that was like a supercomputer having to like figure out. I mean, it was not that different then than what you see now in terms of all the, you could like change the diff settings for entry, mid corner and exit all on separate rotary switches and like all this crazy shit. Those cars at that time, like the 2000, it was basically 2010 spec car, are close to as fast as the cars still are now. They were super, it was pre-hybrid, so they were super light, like little ultra nimble cars, but running on slicks instead of the groove tires and all that kind of stuff. Like that was a serious, like, mind masher going and doing that. Like it was just so you could not believe the level of performance that this thing had. I'd known some guys that had had F1 to Scott Dixon, some other IndyCar guys had done a lot of F1 testing. I was just getting I'd lucked into doing half a day for 3 days. And they were all right when they basically said, like half a day for 3 days is not enough to even remotely like wrap your head around this thing basically. But it certainly proved to be true when I got over there that the things were pulls like 5.5 or 6 G's.
Damn.
In every direction. Like your neck is just, you could do all the neck exercises you want and it's just smoked after like 10 laps. That was a really insane. I think the difference between an Indy car and an F1 car maybe now is not quite as dramatic, but back then it just in terms of the tech was like.
Was that the first trip overseas to race? Is F1 simulator? Or did you do any on-track stuff?
I had done a little bit of driving over there. I'd never been to the track that we did the test at in Spain, but I'd done a little bit of driving. So I guess, the idea of just going over there and doing that was not totally foreign, but it was a lot to take in for sure. First
race overseas, was that same confidence that you're like, just like you were talking about getting in the IndyCar? Or was it kind of the like, shit, we got to show out for US, It's a different culture and it's definitely different. Especially back then, it was a different stigma on what your talent was based on where you came from.
That was definitely true. The first time that I had raced over there was in the off season between 2005 and 2006. So I had been racing F2000 in the US, was going to race in the national championship in 2006. In that off season, I won a sort of scholarship, which was called Team USA scholarship, that was for this reason, basically to get American guys to go race overseas and expose them to all the difference that you kind of alluded to. Just the style of racing is different, the competition's different, the way the cars drive is different. Like, there's little things that actually make a big difference that all the way up and down the ladder for a long time, like the wheel diameter that cars in Europe race on was smaller. So you have a much taller sidewall on the tire that deflects a lot more. It gives you a totally different feel for the behavior of the car than, in the US, smaller sidewall and, more of a radial feel, as opposed to kind of more of a bias ply-ish vibe. And so I went over and did that in 05, and you're literally driving a car that's like, the livery is the stars and stripes. Like there's no way to hide that you're the American guy that's out there doing this. And there was definitely a little bit, I felt a little bit of that pressure. Like, okay, I got to go, show up here for sure. Had a similar experience a few years after that. I think when I was racing Indy Lights, there was a series called the A1GP that went on for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years or something. It was the Championship of Nations or something, sort of an Olympics style formula car thing that raced all over the world, mostly through kind of our winter. But every nation had a team, and you had some F1 guys and aces out of different parts of the motorsport world doing this in their off season. So it's one thing to go over and race up against a bunch of other guys that are more or less at your level. It's another thing when you're on the way up and you're racing against like, some dude that just got out of the, Red Bull Junior F1 team, is coming and doing this. So I was actually the test driver while Marco Andretti was the primary guy that was racing in that car, but ended up doing a couple of the races because he had, some other commitments or whatever. And it's definitely, I mean, all of those things, I ended up doing well doing that. And it was actually a part of getting, I think, some more IndyCar tests on our side of the pond. I think that was the way that I began to look at all of those things. Is at a bare minimum, I may or may not be super impressing like these European teams enough that I'm just going to get cherry picked out of this group of guys to go start racing in Europe. But I can definitely impress the American teams that I'm already engaged with about what is probably my more likely route to becoming a pro doing this by doing well overseas. So, it definitely functioned to do that along the way.
It's crazy. I'm sitting here listening a little off, but
This is gonna be something insulting.
No. It's. I mean, maybe. We'll see. So, like, I born and raised in the South, right? I've lived a lot of places, but I'm from the South. I got a little bit of an accent. So when you're in the South, growing up in the South, the only people you have to like look down upon or say that they're more country or redneck than you is maybe another state, right? So being from Alabama, you're like, well, at least I'm not from Mississippi, right? At least we're not from Louisiana. Then you come up to the Midwest. Everybody in the Midwest is like, you guys in the South are fucking rednecks, right? You go out west to California. California's like, everybody except California is fucking rednecks, right? Then you got a guy from California. If you're from the U.S. and you go to Europe, you're a redneck. It doesn't matter where. It doesn't matter where you're from in the United States. It's so funny how you step it back out. Yeah. But in Europe, everyone's like,
that's a pretty good theory.
It really is. Everybody's got to look at another thing of like, well, at least we're not from there, And the guys in Europe.
I mean, there's something about those dudes. They're just a little bit fancier than us,
Yeah, they're a little fancy. I do have a question though. I've always wanted to know this. We're F1 enthusiasts. I wouldn't say Uber fans or whatever, but watch, and there's always times I'm watching, I'm like, holy fucking shit. That's like kind of like we talk about the Isle of Man. We bring up the Isle of Man all the time where it's just like different. It's a different level, different
just
breed.
Insane.
It's not human.
It's not human. Right. And you look at guys, I mean, say Max Verstappen or some of these other guys that can perform at a level like that repeatedly. We look at it, obviously, have never even done, a 0.5% of anything that you've done racing wise. Do you look at some of that stuff the same kind of way where you're like, holy fucking shit, how does he do that like that often? Or is it a different kind of like, I can see
in
how
that fucking car.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where your thought.
I'd definitely take a swing in the Red Bull if we're asking.
Is it because I mean, obviously there's a lot behind the scenes that go into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting, motorsports these days, the car is such a big part of the equation, and the cars are so fast that it's actually really hard it's hard as somebody that knows everything about it to pick apart, like, why is Max so much, even just compared to his teammate, like, where is he finding so much extra speed? What is any of this really saying about how good he is? Like, it's hard to parse that outside of, like, the sector time doesn't really tell the whole story, right? And there was a time in racing where, if you were watching F1 in the 70s, you were just watching like Gilles Villeneuve coming fucking flat out and sideways through the corner. It was like it was much more apparent
who had the bigger balls or why,
whether it was fast or slow or whatever. It was much more apparent, like the style that different guys had and kind of the skill sets that different drivers had. That was just, and that's true for every motorsport. We talk about this a lot within the industry, which is like, can we actually start designing? We've all sort of reached the limit of how fast the cars could safely be driven on the tracks that we go to at this point. Like Indy cars, NASCAR cars, F1 cars, you could easily design a car in any one of those spaces that would go faster than could possibly be considered safe for a human to drive the thing. Right. They've basically been going the same speed for like 20 years now. That's not because we don't have the ability to make them go faster. It's just because the insurance policies basically don't allow it to happen. And so over that period of time, like the cars have gone away from, they become these precision instruments, right? Like they're super optimized aerodynamically. The power in a lot of, certainly on the NASCAR and IndyCar side, the power has been turned down as the most obvious way to keep speed in check. And so you kind of have this dynamic where it's like, all right, I mean, we talk about this, with qualifying in Indianapolis, like it is without question the absolute most insane thing that any of us do over the course of a year. Like you are on the ragged edge at, you're bending into turn one at like 242 and a half, and you don't know if the thing's going to stick and you got to hang on for 4 laps, like it's just the car is trimmed out. Like you were using same set of tires that it'll take 35 laps to go through during the race. They are smoked, like dust coming off of them after 4 laps in qualifying. Like it's a completely insane thing. And anytime anybody from somewhere else comes and actually does it, they say the same thing. But we have the conversation in the garage area sometimes with our engineers, like guys that are in the industry watching, watching somebody go out, run a lap, for pole or whatever. And they're kind of even sitting there like, I don't know, that doesn't look that hard. And so I guess I say all that basically to say that, within our version of the sport, I think we, looking at F1, looking at guys like Max, Fernando, Lewis, there's a few other guys, Leclerc, there's a few guys that you could definitely put into that like truly elite driver category. It's a bummer that it's so hard to tell why they're elite. Because I think that would bring a lot more people into the fray. Like we're so focused on having close racing and all this kind of stuff, but it's like, I mean, I would say this, and this is no, I say this knowing that there are NASCAR guys that feel the same way about it, but like Daytona at this point, what skill are we really showcasing on restrictor plate races at this point? Like it's certainly not pure driving skill.
Because they're not on the ragged
it's not
edge
to say
anymore.
it's not to say that there isn't skill involved in winning the Daytona 500, but it's not just like that kind of pure essence of driving the hell out of the thing like it might have been for, Petty and Earnhardt and like all through these other eras of the sport. So for Max, I think unfortunately, because of the fact that we latch on to, well, the Red Bull is just so good. He's probably underrated by most people. Like the things that when I've had the benefit of talking to engineers that have worked with him and all that kind of stuff, and they're like, dude, he will do some things with the race car or do some things with a race car that just nobody else that we've ever seen can do those things. So I definitely wouldn't. I definitely don't underappreciate like what he's bringing to the table.
Funny though, like you said, there's not the visible to a novice, somebody that's watching, to see why he's so fast. You didn't have a question of why Dale Sr. was fast.
Yeah,
because he'd move you the fuck out of the way.
He's hanging it.
Right?
He's half in
you
the grass.
You can watch
sideways.
It. Even modern day NASCAR. You look at Kyle Larson. You can tell why he's fast on some tracks. I mean, so you take the restrictor plate. You can tell why he can put the race cars some other guys maybe either physically can't or don't have the balls to. You look at Jeff Gordon, whatever. He was very consistent and stayed the fuck out of trouble. But you look at Max. I mean, you're not talking about just he's consistently good. Like 7, 8, 9 seconds, like just no big deal. I'll make it up. That's significant.
I think that, the mindset is, I think the other part of it as a driver that, you go through, I've been fortunate to call this a profession at a very high level for a long time. Those guys are doing it on a whole another kind of playing field, if nothing else. We kind of experience the mental part of your approach to driving the car and all that kind of stuff a little bit differently, since we do, IndyCar is inclusive of oval racing, and that's a totally different kind of psychological, emotional thing that you're bringing to the table than showing up at road course races every weekend. But either way, you gain enough insight into, like, I know how hard it is to make little adjustments and to get better on that side, but how important that is. Like, that will make a bigger difference if you can lock into like being in your zone a little deeper or a little better or a little more consistently or whatever. How huge of a difference that makes. And so it's definitely interesting for us to then kind of try to extrapolate out a little bit, like, what are those guys doing, and what's happening when you see these situations where a guy like Max is, I think you pointed out very rightly, like, he is one of the few guys that you can put him in a pretty serious jam and he just has this whole other gear that he can go to, and he can just start ripping the lap, and it's just coming from out of nowhere in conditions that nobody else seems to be able to do it. It's part of that is
Tom Brady, like, ×5.
Yeah, totally. It's part of that is, he's in a position, he also knows that he's in the best car. Like you mentioned earlier, just having that little bit of confidence can make up for a lot of other discrepancies. Like you can just get into hero mode when you have that confidence, and everything kind of mentally and emotionally falls into place a little easier when that's the case. But I think both from a physical skill perspective and a mental approach point of view, Max is among the top 3 guys. And at this point, you'd be hard pressed not to say that he is the most elite guy in the field from that perspective. Like, I think he's one of those guys you could stick in any car and he would just be the fastest guy in that car, no questions asked.
You think so?
I do.
Any car?
Well, I don't think he'd be the fastest driver overall, but I think you could stick him with any other teammate basically, and he'd be the faster of the two.
Hey everybody, I'm Andy Stumpf, host of the IRONCLAD original Change Agents. For over a decade, IRONCLAD has worked with brands and individuals to create world-class films, series, podcasts, and ad campaigns. In fact, I've been working with IRONCLAD for the past few years. I was introduced to them on a project through the Navy SEAL Foundation. I've worked with them on a variety of projects, even up here in Montana, long before they proposed the idea of Change Agents to me. They're the best in their field. And I say that because there are plenty of people out there looking for the best, looking for the cream of the crop, looking for the top of the triangle. And if you're looking for that, you need to look no further than IRONCLAD. If you ever need media by way of film, a series, podcasts, or ad campaigns, they have you covered. You can reach out today and follow them anywhere at This Is IRONCLAD, the ampersand, and then This Is IRONCLAD, or visit them online, thisisironclad.com. Again, www.thisisironclad.com.
I'm curious about the mental aspect. That's what always intrigues me, is you can practice, obviously, you just run laps, right? The physical aspect of getting in tune with the race car, but preparing yourself and being able to like focus, the depth perception, the reactions as quick as that stuff is happening, it blows my mind. Like, I mean, I'll be out on the highway just like driving a little spirited and like a couple like quick lane changes, and it's like, a little nerve wracking, and you're like,
yeah, but you're also texting and playing with the stereo.
Right. But I mean, take that from 80 miles an hour to 240. How do you prepare yourself? What's the training like for that to improve yourself in that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of, I guess there's like 3 layers to it. One is just strictly your physical training, to be as, fit basically to go do it as you can be, which the level for that is really high now because the cars are, you're like pulling fighter jet G's, and, in IndyCar, the cars still don't have power steering. So it's actually like a super physical thing. The second part of it you alluded to, which is like your reaction time, and kind of that also is just like a physical thing that you can train. Like you can kind of train those skills up, right? And so there's a bunch of things that we do from different drills, or you're working with a trainer, and we work in these facilities that have, you've probably seen these like crazy light boards that you're kind of trying to quickly follow the light and do all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of somewhere in between a physical and like mental thing. You are training your physical reactions, but it's also just your mental reaction time that kind of sends all those signals, right? The third thing, which, I mean, I'll be honest, I think I probably didn't really start digging into, certainly until I was already a pro. Like I already made it to the IndyCar Series and had a relative degree of success at that level. It was like at that point, then I started to realize, like, okay, I can kind of tell the difference between when I'm really at my best and when I'm not quite at my best. And that as a pro, for when you're an amateur or you're coming up through the ranks and you're still figuring things out, the difference between you really being at your best and really not being at your best might be like half a second a lap or something. When you get to the point that you're a pro, the difference is much smaller than that. Like, but it feels way more exaggerated. Like you really notice it in a different way because you're so locked into every little nitty gritty detail of where the lap time is coming from. And it's so close. Like in the IndyCar Series on a road course, if I just had a half a tenth of a second in my back pocket for my entire career, I'd have been like a 20-time race winner and racing for Roger Penske. Like it's that much of a difference that separates the really, really elite greatest guys from a tier just below that is super volatile in terms of where you end up race to race. You might be outside the top 10 just because you don't have that half a tenth. And so, but that is for some guys, that locking into that and being able to go throw that down, like get locked into that mindset and just go execute just comes totally naturally to them. For me, I found I was getting into this place where it was like a little hit or miss. Like I wasn't quite being able to just get there all the time. And so I actually, and you're seeing more of this work, guys working with, mental coaches, I guess, of some variety. Yeah. Performance coach. That's the easy way to put it, for sure. I found an ex-pro baseball player that we had played baseball at the same high school. I actually got introduced to him through my high school baseball coach. They remained friends. That had an experience like this. Buddy Biancalana played for the Kansas City Royals when they won the '85 World Series, I think. He was a starting shortstop through the playoffs, like made his way into the starting role coming into the playoffs that year, and just had like an out of his mind World Series. Like was, played the best baseball of his life during that World Series. They won the World Series, but had kind of his own experience of not quite being able to like replicate that level of performance, and realized after his career kind of was over that it all just came down to this not really having the right mental attitude and not really understanding exactly what that was, and recognizing that just being totally aligned between your headspace and your body, there's like this thing that happens that you tap into your sort of body's inner intelligence in a way, like these things that your body does just know how to automatically do if you let it. Like if you can free yourself of consciously thinking and worrying and anticipating what's going to happen next, and allow yourself to just sit back into that moment. It's almost like finding a little bit of patience, basically.
Cool. Is that completely mental, or do you find that there's any other physical aspects that you can help you get there? Do you replicate the same meal? Is that like a fighter, no sex, for a week before the race? Is that like I'm going to get a certain amount of sleep, a certain workout? Is there anything that physically that will help you get to that mental space?
Some of those things definitely matter, like getting great sleep, what you eat the night before, all of those kinds of things, because they will affect just your body chemistry and all that kind of stuff. But in some respects, the beautiful thing about the experience that I've had with it is most of it's just do the work and know where you need to get to, understand that part of it, like just practice replicating that mental space that you're trying to achieve. I've done that through a meditation practice, basically. So something that I can do without being at the track. I can do it whenever, I can do it daily if I want. It doesn't depend on me being able to have access to go get in a race car or whatever. And it's one of those things that, it's because a part of the process is then really understanding, like, why am I even doing this in the first place? What am I trying to get out of this? It like depends on, for me, the process has been really getting to the root of, why do I enjoy this?
That'll take you some dark places, man.
About this. Yeah. Well, I mean, it will. It makes you kind of got to be a little vulnerable to like allow yourself to go through some shit. We're
gonna see him pull off the track and be like, oh shit, he said, what am I doing this for anyway?
Mental crisis. Yeah. But it's been awesome for me. And it's allowed me to unlock a little bit of that, like, just keep it simple, get in the car. Like, qualifying at Indy, I brought that up before, but, or a race day at Indy, those are things that can be super stressful. I mean, qualifying at the Speedway is almost just as much as the race, because you might not make the show. You might, it's not just a matter of like where you start, but if there's 36 cars there, 3 people are going home. So just being out there at the wrong time of day or having some shit go wrong, like that could be your ticket home. That's something that I always actually looked forward to, that because I just loved actually doing it. Like, I loved going out and qualifying. That was just something that I always liked to go do. But going through this kind of process really made me embrace the fact that it's like, okay, like once you're sitting in the car and you're buckled in and you're going to go out there and do it, like, you are just that you are there to do the thing that you're there to do at that point. Like, and it's as simple as that. Like, that was actually a really beautiful, it like freed me up of a lot of that anxiety that is hard to keep down,
For sure.
Those kinds of moments, which made a big difference.
Dude, when you started talking baseball, I started thinking, I thought you were going to go there with the story.
Canseco.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Rick Vaughn, Major League, when he lost his fastball. Remember? Seeing that he comes back.
You're going rookie of the year.
Oh, no. He comes back with the glasses, with the skulls and the cut off sleeves. I thought that was going to be like kind of how you mentally
get back in it.
You think so? It's just what popped in your head.
Yeah.
he's got the little bit of the rock star Vaughn.
I could knock that.
Yeah.
I was going a little bit more NASCAR with that. You get the size shaved, little mullet.
Nah, he's a little.
I'm
more.
I'm trying not to. I've got long hair. Don't have a mullet. We'll keep that straight.
Speaking of NASCAR, how's Larson going to do next year or this year in Indy?
I think, so Indy, one of the things that I think was going to be a real challenge for him was that we were supposed to introduce this hybrid system for this upcoming year, and they've bailed on that prior to Indy. So I think that'll actually make things a lot more straightforward. That car is going to be fast as hell, and I think to say that,
dude, you can talk shit if you want to talk shit. We don't have no problem.
I love Kyle, and I'm so stoked that he's coming to do it, because I just love these kind of crossover, things. I think in light of some of the things we talked about earlier about it just being kind of hard to see how good guys are in different stuff, an obvious way to showcase that is just go get in something different and go play in somebody else's sandbox and like see how you stack up. So it was something that used to happen a lot in motorsports, doesn't happen that much anymore. You love to see it, and I'm super glad that he's going to be there. I think, if we took Jimmy Johnson coming and doing it as a little bit of a template for what Kyle's going to go through, Kyle's a lot younger. He's earlier in his career. He's more in his kind of physical prime. I think that'll help him. He's done a lot. To be frank, he's just done a lot more stuff than Jimmy had up to that point, even. So, Kyle's going to be jumping into this thing, I think, just fresher and like more ready for some different things, more ready to hang the thing out a little bit.
Just so you guys know, Kyle Larson's going to be racing IndyCar at the Indy 500. So he's going to race 500 miles that morning, right? That afternoon. He's going to fly and he's going to do the Coke 600 that evening, right? So Jimmy Johnson's done it. Did Gordon do it?
Jimmy didn't do the double.
Jimmy didn't do the double?
Didn't do the double. So he just did Indy.
Tony Stewart did the double?
Tony did the double. Robbie Gordon, Tony Stewart, Kurt Busch. Have all, I mean, recently there was some, I know it's funny. Like, Cale Yarborough ran Indy. There were some guys like back
that have done
in the day that did it, but I don't think it was on the same day as Colt 600 and on all that kind of stuff. So the recent guys are Tony, Robbie, and Kurt.
Shit ton of racing.
It's a crazy number of miles. I think the best we were looking this up for some reason, but I think Tony has the best like average finish basically between the two races. He was like 5th in one and 6th in the other. Kyle's going to be in equipment that could win both races. I think the thing for him is just there's inevitably going to be some shit that happens during the race at Indy that is just impossible to like practice that much for.
Taco Bell. That's going to be that could be the deal breaker.
What do you mean? He's going to have some Taco Bell?
Yes.
I don't think Kyle's going to have some Taco Bell.
I think that's a less likely.
How come from a PR
him,
standpoint that Danica never did it?
I don't know. That's a good question. That seems like that would have been an obvious thing for her to go do.
Yeah.
I don't think she did, because she came back and did Indy.
Yeah.
But I don't think she was running the stock car at that point. So, yeah.
Anyway,
it's a hell of a feat for sure.
How hard is it to get out of one car and into another? I mean, not even same day, but you just
step out and then you step in. Okay. Oh, you mean physically?
Yeah. Mentally, like just getting so focused on driving one style and then jumping into something else and driving a complete different car that is going to be reacting completely different. How do you make that transition and continue to?
I'd feel like it'd be like taking a big old swig of what you thought was Coca-Cola and it ended up being like sweet tea. It just fucks you up because you think what it's fixing to be, and it ends up being, oh shit, I forgot this is a different car. They got to be completely different.
I've always been impressed with the way like a race car driver can jump into damn near anything and drive it. Like we put, what was his name that drove the Rampage Camaro? Mike Skeen jumped in and, total unproven car. I mean, fast.
Yes.
Like, a little hot rod that we built, and dude is just ripping. And I'm like, whoa, like,
Mike's good, man.
It took like it would take me days to get like acquainted with it to like even feel comfortable.
Well, he touched on it at the very beginning. That I think he puts a lot of weight on. What I was going to ask about was there is the talent.
Yeah,
there's a God-given talent. There's a born with talent that you can absolutely craft and curate further than some other guys through your training and stuff like that. But I was going to your point, is there a guy, if you're not born with it, can you train it into somebody?
I think to a point, for sure. And I guess I would say I don't look at this as necessarily like a good thing, but the fact that the cars are so refined right now, that I think takes a little bit of the emphasis in terms of performance off of just natural talent in a way. Like there's a little bit less, there's so much data, there's so much information. The cars are such precision instruments. Like you can kind of back your way into what the fast way around a place is just by like analyzing the hell out of it in some sense. You will still see at the highest levels, you still see the best guys that are the most talented guys, rise to the top. But I think there's a level of like, and it's not to say that work ethic and all that shouldn't be worth something, but there's a level of that I think it gets you a little farther now than maybe it would have in, a bygone era where the cars are much more raw and you don't have quite as much information to be going off of. Like, prior generations of the sport, I think we're more dependent on just having that, like, I don't have the split times on the dash. I know because I feel it through my ass. Like I know where the limit of the car is and can just keep it there, for more of the lap than the other guys can.
Used to be a lot more seat of your pants driving and feeling it.
I think it just naturally, used to be that way. And so one of the areas where you see guys still excel at that is when they're bouncing around between different stuff, because you got to be able to just get in and like kind of figure it out. You're I think the thing that you kind of mentioned it with Mike. So I've only raced against Mike once. Well, maybe we were probably in the same 24 hours of Daytona when I did that a few years ago, but I raced really with Mike at Pikes Peak in 2017, running the Pikes Peak Hill Climb. Like he and I were in the same category, basically running these Porsche GT4 cars. So we were sort of competing against each other doing that, and both of us with totally weird backgrounds to go and race at Pikes Peak. In a way, he's like a sports car ace. I was coming from racing Indy cars. Travis Pastrana was another guy that was in our class that we were racing against. It was really cool. But I've immediately had a lot of respect for Mike doing that because he was super fast. And, the three of us actually were just like neck and neck basically the whole time throughout the course of practice and qualifying and race day and all the rest of it. But I think the thing in my experience it's like when I was coming up through the ranks, particularly I mentioned earlier that open wheel racing was kind of a mess at the time. Like the I don't know, like advice that guys like me were getting at that time were like, you have to be a super specialist if you're going to make it to be a pro doing this. Like you have to be super focused on open wheel if you're going to kind of get to the promised land, because the professional landscape at the top was all over the place. So it's going to there's going to be one guy every couple of years that actually comes out of the ladder that gets there. And that I think I probably took that advice almost too literally, which was like, only do that. And whereas if I was to give my younger self some advice now, I'd be like, okay, well, have that be your main thing. But anytime somebody gives you an opportunity to go do something else, just go do it. Like you have this kind of notion that, and I think this is true across maybe a lot of professions, or certainly within other sports or forms of motorsport. Like you have this kind of, I don't know, you develop a headspace that, oh, the person that I'm trying to impress along the open wheel ladder next, if I go do this other thing and suck at it, like that's going to somehow affect what they think up, or whatever. That's going to somehow impact my credibility or my credentials or, my reputation. And the reality of it is they're paying attention to what they're paying attention to that matters to them. They don't give a shit what you're doing off to the side. Like they probably are impressed that you're even giving it a whirl, And
I'd maybe keep those tweets clean. Just they care about that a lot. So to back to Phil's question.
In terms of the other things you go drive anyway, I think
back to Phil's question. I want to know. So tables are reversed, right? You're racing IndyCar, right? You get the chance to get in Larson's car. You get 3 practice sessions in a Hendricks car, and then you're going to run Indy 500, and you're going to do a duel in that day. How many laps does it take in that car at the Coke 600 for you to be like, all right, I got this. I know now my ass is in tune with the tires, and I know where it's at.
That's a tough question. I mean, I think I'd like to think that you get in, and by the halfway point, at least, that you're like, okay, I've got some level of comfort here with how to get around the place. And I understand how the track is evolving. And I've followed Kyle Busch around for long enough to have some sense of what's possible to do here with the car. I mean, I think doing that is frankly harder than what Kyle's going to be doing. Going the other direct, Kyle Larson is going to be going the other direction, because, getting in a car that has more grip usually is just a little easier, I think, whereas for us getting in something that has a lot less grip, it does that stock car is going to do everything worse basically than an Indy car does. It's got less tire, it weighs more, it's going to be less downforce, all that kind of stuff. So I think for an IndyCar guy to do, even the best IndyCar guy to do the Coca-Cola 600, I think they will finish worse than the best NASCAR guys in good equipment going the other way. That would be my
the cool part is both ways
perspective on it. But
all
there's a lot of challenges you got to face one way or the other. Like I think you're about to say.
All the IndyCar drivers and all the NASCAR drivers, the cool thing about it is they're so open and understanding to like a new driver. They're going to be like welcoming, you know, they're going to be like, oh, go ahead.
Here's what you want to do.
Yeah.
It's a big safe space.
Yeah. There's never like a, guess what?
Until you like qualify in the top 10 and then everybody's pissed, you know?
And there's never a,
Like, get this fucking guy out of here.
I fucking love watching like that crossover thing. And I even watch, you know, in NASCAR, any of the rookies and whatever, there is no, we talk about it all the time. It's not bullying, but it's, you don't get a trophy by participating, right? You got to go through the gauntlet. You got to work hard.
Yeah.
Right? And nobody's going to be like, guess what, new kid? Go ahead. You're taking me on the inside. I'll move up.
It's
go
not
ahead.
like super inclusive is what you're saying.
It's you got to work hard to be accepted. And it, like he talked about, you got to do the work. Do the work.
Nothing wrong with that.
No.
So you come out of a precision instrument, right? A race car. And then in your free time, it appears as though
Where are you going? Which one?
a race car.
Okay.
And it appears as though you jump into a 1960 Cadillac,
Yeah,
which is fucking sick. Dude, I was stalking your Instagram just a little bit. What's that like? I mean, coming out of a car that's got the best steering response like in the history of like automobiles to the worst steering response in the history of automobiles.
It's got bigger fins.
That's,
Arrow's probably equivalent.
but dude, so sick.
Yeah, it's you know, it's funny. Like I've gone through a little bit of I think people maybe have the expectation that race car drivers just, you know, want to be in some super fast street car. And the reality, I don't know, for me at least, you know, just nothing ever even comes close, right, to what the race car feels like. Like every supercar you get in, you toasted the brakes and the tires were smoked and whatever within like a couple laps on a racetrack of really hanging the thing out. So, you know, I'm in the phase of my you know, streetcar life, and you know, these things may always change, where I'm like, I just want cool drivers. Like I want something that I get in, and you know, I've had some super cherry muscle cars and some other stuff like that even something, you know, and that's not working any better than my Cadillac. I had this just bitchin' red on red SS 396 4-speed 66 Chevelle. And even that was kind of like, it doesn't really do anything great. And it's just super nice. Like I'm stressed about putting miles on this thing. Like I don't want somebody dinging it in the parking lot, like whatever. And so I've gone kind of all the way the other direction, which is I went and found this Cadillac, put it on bags. You know, it's redid the interior, so it's nice. I mean, I drove that thing. It's just stock 390, stock, you know, high dramatic, you know, nothing crazy in terms of any of the rest of it. Still on drums. I mean, I drove that thing from Boulder, Colorado, pulled it out of storage, put some gas in it, drove it to Indianapolis for the 500, you know, drove it back, know, along 2 days along I-70, both directions, like, you know, 2,000 miles or whatever. You know, if it like blows up on the side of the road, then
just leave it.
Who gives a shit? Like throw a big block in it and like,
how long
you know,
have you
whatever. Like it's.
How long have you had the Caddy?
I've had that. I've had the six. So I also have a CTSV wagon. So 2 caddies, but
the 60.
I've had the 60 Coupe de Ville since 2013. So like 10 years. Okay,
a long time. If he was saying 2 years, I was gonna be doing the math. He's got an 8-month-old. It's big car, a lot of activities, a lot of activities in the old Caddy. Trying to set him up. I was just trying to walk him into
no
the
comment. But yeah, I just, you know, I love that car in particular. I mean, I love that era of. I grew up kind of in GM. You know, my dad had that 68 when I was growing up, and he's had a bunch of cool cars since he actually now his race car. He's still got that 68 Camaro, but he has this car is called the Gray Ghost. It was a 64 Pontiac Tempest that raced in the 1971 Trans Am Series. So it was like it's a totally cool story that the, you know, factory Pontiac guys basically were ready to go racing from 1970 into 71. GM shut the hose on factory racing, you know, that year. They kind of had some backdoor budget that they could use, and as the story goes, basically the GM execs, the Pontiac execs just said, look, you guys can go racing, but you just can't use a Firebird because it'll look like it's a factory deal at that point. So, Herb Adams, who's, kind of legendary within the, Pontiac engineering and design, studios and teams or whatever through that whole, through the 80s and everything else. He and his motley crew of Pontiac engineers, they were, as the story goes, they were at home at Herb's place, looked outside the window, had this phone call, looked outside the window. Well, my wife Sandy's got this 64 Tempest, like we could turn that into a race car. And so they, they pulled out all the stops on this thing, right? Like Sandy obliged, and they did all the crazy like Smokey Eunuch shit on this thing that they were never going to get away with on a factory car.
Yeah.
Basically. So it's this really, really badass.
That's cool.
Trans Am car that he's got. And I've kind of gone through a little bit of the same thing. I had the Chevelle. I've got the Cadillac. I've got this, 4x4 travel all. So I got a 67 travel all that's on a Chevy K30, chassis and suspension and drivetrain. So it's 454 turbo 400, the whole 9 yards on that deal. And then I've got a 70 Camaro that I'm basically just firing up a build. You guys have my guy, Eric Black on a couple of weeks ago. So
hell yeah.
Eric and I have been doing some tweaking on that thing.
Oh, have you?
To kick off a new project. Yeah.
Sweet. That's going to be, it's got to be a little Trans Am inspired, I'd imagine.
Yeah, definitely. For me, those second gen Camaros just don't get nearly enough love as being just great cars.
Cool.
From a racing heritage perspective, like, in the Trans Am series, that's obviously where they would have been. That, because the factory support got killed off and, Penske's were running the Camaros 68, 69, and then last minute switched to AMC for the following year. So they just didn't really have the on track success that I think would have made them more like of an iconic racing kind of thing. But they're just beautiful cars. Like the Chaparral Camaro in particular, to me, is the one that's just like, man, you see from every angle, it's super muscular with the flares and, you see one of those cars next to any of the first gen cars, you just tell it's like, it should just be a way faster car. They're way lower, way wider stanced, much more muscular, weight distribution's better. So that's definitely the angle, like 15s, keeping it super period correct in terms of aesthetic, but building in a little modern storyline in terms of like why the rest of it is what it is. I've got a modern LS Copo 427 motor in the garage from a project that I was working on with GM kind of mid 2000, or, whatever, 2012, 13, 14, when the drag cars came out. And so doing a little like ZL1 riff on that thing. Cause those LS Copo motors were aluminum block.
Who's building that thing? You building it?
Yeah, I'm going to do a little like kind of mashup of, it's like sort of a friends and family build, like some really good fabricators out here in Colorado that I've worked with on some other projects, but not running it through a shop, kind of, and partially because I want to keep it a little bit raw. Like I want it to be a super minimalist build, like everything you want from an experiential perspective, but nothing that wouldn't have been there in a race car, basically.
Except maybe a roadster shop chassis. Probably needs a chassis.
Hey,
maybe
it probably does need a chassis.
Probably
I mean that fits into the
what could have
modern.
been.
What would you do if you could do it now? So
I'm doing it now, dude. I've got a 70 Trans Am that I've got the same kind of vibe going.
Oh, badass!
It's got 15s on like those Avon kind of historic race tires.
Yeah, hell yeah.
But they're just fat ass 15s, and they look really.
Are you
nasty.
running mini lights or what? What's the
I
wheel?
just got the factory Pontiac wheels. We widened them in the back. I just wanted it to look stock. I mean, mini lights would have been a natural fit for it, but it's like a sleeper. But
you want a little more muscular stock looking.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm going away from the mini lights too. There's this kind of. I mean, so with any of these kind of builds, like I just love. Even if it's sort of manufactured, like there being a story, like why is this thing what it helps me to kind of figure out, like, why do I want it to be whatever it So the first influence for sure for me with that build is that Chaparral Camaro. Like that thing is just,
it's cool.
I'm going for that ivory white, like that kind of stance of those cars back in the day. It's just, I think this is true for almost any car ever. Like the racing versions of those cars are always just the sickest versions of them. Like why mess with that? Basically, I actually, through some friends, have access to the original factory bucks for the fender flares, for the wood bucks for the fender flares for those cars back then. So
that's
running steel fenders with all the original stuff. So the aesthetic is legit. But there was this other Camaro during that era that raced in Europe. Oddly enough, it raced in there was this Australian guy that, they had the kind of what was the V8 supercars basically back then was Camaros and Mustangs, and they look a little more wild basically than any of the Trans Am cars were. Like the rules were just a little more flexible, and so they had a little crazier kind of stuff going on. The engines were bigger. This guy Frank Gardner came from that era, or from that series in Australia, and raced in the European Touring Car Championship in 1974 with a early gen, like a 73 spec Camaro. And so, you can imagine he's racing against Ford Capris and BMW 3-liter SLs and, this crazy giant, almost like IMSA style Camaro, like had super wide body shit going on, all this kind of stuff. But the tie-in for me was not only that was just a badass, just so out of place, but so cool that this thing was racing at like Spa and Monza and whatever. And it, like, if it ever even made it to qualifying without blowing up, it was like a huge success for these guys. So it was not a successful car by any stretch of the imagination, but because the rules were more open, they called it like a second gen ZL1. So they raced with aluminum 427, big block 427. That was a derivative of, the Can-Am motors and the motors that were in the, 69 Camaro and Vet ZL1 cars. And because the rules were more relaxed, and this guy Frank Gardner also raced Lola T70s, they ran on Lola T70 center lock mags, which were also 15s, but these super deep offset center locks, a 6-spoke mag, and one piece forged mags. So I've tracked down some guys that make that wheel now. That's my little wheel riff is, since I've got the aluminum 427 in the thing anyway, and go hunt down some of those Lola mags just to make it so that if I went and parked this thing next to the Chaparral car, it'd like look a little different, at least. Do
you think there was any like focus on aesthetics back then? We always like talk about that because it's like, it's so difficult to like try to consciously go into a car build like that and achieve the cool factor as though you didn't care. Like you were just like, back then it's like, it was so damn cool. Like you think when they did like the Sunoco Camaro, like were they looking at that and being like, let's make this so bitch and
they did.
Like style the hell out of it? Or were they like,
hell yeah, they did.
Yeah.
You've seen the pinstriping on those things. Like they definitely paid attention to
they had best looking car awards in the 60s at racetracks.
Really?
Oh yeah. You'd get a trophy before the fucking race started for the best looking car.
I always thought
I was just going to say, I do think though that, we talk about this a lot, like in the modern context of cars, like, whatever, there's so much just like extra stuff, that kind of factors into the look and feel of all these things, that I think it's why I think that the racing versions of all of these things should really be the starting point for like any hot rod. That it's like they end up looking the way that they do because the form follows the function, right? Like they've ended up with that super muscular fender flare because that's just how they fit the tire inside. That was the way that they extracted the most out of the regulations, and that's still the case today for every race car that's out there. Like, the racing development mule for every car is like the sickest version of that car that you could possibly ever see, and I think it's just for that reason. Like they just look badass when they're all raw materials and bare carbon, and you just get to see the thing in its most like primal state kind of. And so I think that's where I'm at with any old car build, is like, if there was a race car, if they ever made this thing into a race car, start with that and like work your way back into making it kind of a street car to whatever, degree you want.
Think about how many more Tauruses they would have sold if it would look like
The
a
SHO.
NASCAR.
But they did the SHO. The SHO, they sold a lot of this.
Yeah, but it didn't look like a NASCAR.
We've come full circle with our car building to that kind of style. That I love that raw, nasty look. And we're just starting a 68 Camaro right now, and the whole theme is just that. It's like, the form's following the function. It needs fender flares because it's got huge ass tires on it.
Is it cool?
Well, I think, and there's so much of the brake package that you can put inside of a 15-inch wheel now is awesome.
Yep.
Like, you don't need, all of these. I know, to me, I'm like I could definitely get on the soapbox on this, but a lot of the reasons why over time, we put bigger wheels and bigger tires and done some of these things that aren't period correct, basically, or have been for good reason in some respects, because the technology wasn't really good enough to make the cars work best in a period correct sort of way. But the reality of it is, like, now they can. I mean, modern Trans Am cars, like the cars that are racing in the contemporary Trans Am series, run on a 15-inch wheel. Like, I'm just going to go to PFC and get calipers and rotors and see if they'll, maybe see if they'll anodize them a different color so they look a little more vintage or something. But, all that stuff's ready to rock and roll. So I think that to me is the exciting thing about any, 4x4 builds, like all this kind of stuff, is what's available just off the shelf lets you really get the aesthetic. You're not hampered by needing to modernize a lot of this stuff from an aesthetic point of view. I don't think. You guys, I'm sure, have a much better feel for that than I do, but it seems like that's the case.
You're right.
For sure. As a dude who's obviously like a huge gearhead, you must be digging the fact that like your Rolodex now allows you to like reach out and
to the baddest ass shit.
Facilitate the car you want to build, right? Because rewind like 15, 20 years, you probably couldn't get those brakes, right? Like,
no,
like,
definitely not.
What,
you'd be paying shit ton
yeah,
more.
You'd be like, what can I get from Summit? 15 inch. Oh shit, there's a Willwood like 4-piston. That's gonna suck. Like,
and I've been there. I mean, I learned how to drive a stick on a 95 Firebird Trans Am. That was my dad's at the time. And, we did a little kind of like father-son build on that thing, like built out a, 396 LT1, or the 90s LT1s.
Yeah. The thing wasn't a WS6, was it?
Oh,
it wasn't. Mine was not a W. It was Trans Am, but it wasn't a
WS6. You don't fuck with the WS6 in the street back in the day.
This thing was like a pretty serious, like this thing was definitely for what it was, with built motor in it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Had it not been for that fucking OptiSpark on that thing,
Still we had to send the chip
we would have
programmed, right?
We would have been, but no, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, between how far everything has come since then, and thankfully having a lot more hookups now than I did, back when I was 17. It's fun to think about these things for sure.
Well, dude, you honestly, I mean, kart racing background, Indy Light, IndyCar. I mean, absolutely need for speed, right? We've talked about the aerodynamics of the 60 Cadillac. You've got a CTS-V. I mean,
Here it comes.
I mean, natural progression for the 2003 Montero. Like, where did the Mitsubishi Montero come in? And it's not like I'm making a new car purchase. I went and searched out a 20-year-old Mitsubishi Montero.
You're sounding a little bit like my wife right now. I'm gonna be totally honest.
I love it.
He gets that a lot.
That's the worst shot that I fucking had.
She said, this is my criteria for a new, I need a new car. We got a little one in the house. We got a dog. We need to be able to get around. Need a little more cabin space. Something that, maybe has 3 rows. Got to have heated seats. Got to have, so kind of like had this list of things. And so you're thinking, all right, we'll go hunt around for whatever new. We'll go down to the Subaru dealership. We'll go check out the Honda Pilot. Like, I don't know, whatever. these things don't seem super exciting to me, but I'm okay with having something in the stable that's just a completely practical car. That doesn't stress me out at all. But then you start kind of looking around, and I made the mistake probably of throwing this out to my Instagram followers of like, okay, here's my criteria. Here's what I want out of this thing. Like, throw me some ideas. And then, my Instagram followers are, I may not have like the most insane Instagram following, but the people that do follow me a lot of them are within industry that are always keen to fire off in the replies. So I got just like this insane, dump of, what I should be going to look at. And it from industry professionals within motorsport, of course, they're like Dieselgate Cayenne, Toyota Land Cruisers, like, here, my buddy has this thing and he's selling it, blah, 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 blah. And so I got, sort of sucked into going down the rabbit hole on, well, what's like used that might make sense. There is an element to all of this stuff that like there's a lot of cars from like 20 years ago that if they just made a brand new version of that car now, I'd buy it over anything that's currently on the market.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I don't want all this bullshit. Like, I don't want giant screens in my car. Like, I want some real knobs. I don't care about.
Dude, if Ford would bring the
my
Probe
wife doesn't
back
either.
right now, I'd buy a new Probe GT today.
Give me a Probe. Give me a Taurus SHO.
Dude, I gotta tell you, I'm shocked for an IndyCar guy looking for a vehicle for your wife and
He
child.
hasn't popped it yet. He hasn't popped it yet. So
Well, that you totally overlooked the Previa. I mean, it's basically a supercar, right? Yeah, mid-engine. I mean,
It's 5-speed turbo.
That didn't factor into my, spreadsheet on this, but
so how did you land on this?
So I landed on this because I basically just convinced myself that buying a used vehicle was a real used vehicle, not like a certified pre-owned vehicle, was like a viable option here. Maybe even a good idea, which I'm not sure my wife agrees with, but and I liked the idea of, well, I'll just cut it to you straight. I liked the idea of the entire stable of cars in our driveway being completely ridiculous. And I like the idea of buying a car that was like something that was designed to go 200,000 miles, basically.
I'm gonna read everybody the caption when I pop it up here on the screen. But first of all, I'm gonna say that I think he liked the idea of the fact of having more money because he's building a project car. I think that he liked that idea the most. So here it is.
And now I can't let Kristen listen to this podcast. So thanks for that.
Right here, the 2003 Mitsubishi Montero. When your wife tasks you with figuring out what a good replacement for her daily driver is, you go with the 12-time Dakar Rally winning Mitsubishi Montero, right? Isn't that the most logical choice? I think that an obscure fact about a car is pushing it a little bit. That's like when anybody's like, oh, you realize that was the 14-time Car and Driver mid-size hatchback of the year winner.
that's the classic.
JD Power best.
That's the classic race on
the
Sunday.
JD Power Associates Award for the best window roller up.
Classic race on Sunday, sell on Monday scenario, right?
So the story behind this particular car is that a friend of mine owned it. And he's down in Denver. He works at this place called Blue Chip, which is this awesome, restoration spot down there, mostly for more modern stuff. But he's like a certified factory trained Ferrari mechanic, has had a bunch of badass 4x4s over the years. So I was like the idea of going and finding a, Land Cruiser or, Lexus LX 570 or something like that was kind of where my head was at. Like, I'm going to go see if like there's even something like this out there.
Everyone's doing those.
This popped up. It's totally legit, and felt good about, having something that had the mileage on it and that kind of stuff, because I know the guy that built it, and he's just like a super pro. Like, he's, done it. Like, this thing is as good as new as like it could kind of possibly be. And so it's an experiment. I'd say it's an experiment to see, I gotta figure out how to get a little ride height out of it. My wife's 5 foot, and like, just getting in the door is kind of a jump for where we're at with it right now. But it's actually, first time driving this thing, I was like, okay, well, I'm keeping it if whether or not this ends up being a viable daily for
I love it
for my wife.
Hey.
So we'll see. She's been an incredible sport about it, which thankfully this has not become an experiment for our marriage. It's just an experiment about whether or not we
that is,
can kind of deal with having a crazy car.
Maybe this is the new badass thing. I mean, Jesse James comes out and owns it with his Santa Cruz and says it's the most badass, vehicle that he's owned. I mean,
before I married my wife, I got her at 88 LeBaron, 89 maybe. I mean, that's a fucking high end.
how many times did it win the Dakar?
Yeah, I never
I would
did.
assume 0.
right?
Yeah. That's 12-time
It's
Dakar
a huge
winner.
selling point, by the way.
Yeah, it's fucking
That made a huge impact on whether my wife cared about this car or not. I just want everybody to know that. She was like, "Oh, no way. Okay, great. Let's do it."
Sweet. Yeah.
Is she like using that in her circle of friends now?
Yeah, that's how she describes it to everybody that
Yeah.
that she, her mom, when her mom called and was asking why JR has this ridiculous car on Instagram, it's like, lifted a foot off the ground and has a snorkel for her daily to drive to and from, the hospital. She's a nurse.
That's a huge flex at the friends, though, when they're having like wine at the afternoon or whatever. Oh, I mean, my husband's an IndyCar driver. I mean, did your husband buy you a 12-time Dakar winning Mitsubishi?
I'm sure that
We're a little ways outside the normal realm of those kinds of conversations, just in general. We have like an ambiguous number of cars in the driveway right now anyway. So, it's just,
Well, I
just how you get
I know
through
you
it.
got to go. We got to ask a couple of the standard questions, but we will ask the question that I'm super interested in. We bring it up all the time. It's not our standard question, but we talk about it all the time. You got a wife. You got a young
I was
daughter,
thinking the same thing, dude.
right? So you run in different circles, right? And the wives, they always have the friend that has a husband. We're going to go out to dinner. You're going to love him. He's super into cars, right? He also has done a little. So you're laughing right now because you know exactly those. I want to take me through that process. There had to be a time that you're like, oh man, this is, yeah.
Fucking shit.
We have to deal with it, right? We've dealt with it for 20 something years,
sure.
and it's always been like sure. And it's always you're nice. You have the dinner. You're right. You do the appetizers or everybody. What do you do? What do you do? And it's always like, oh, just like on TV. Yeah, exactly like you see on TV. Same exact thing. Let's just cut right to it. You tell me more about what you do. I'm sure that those have been some fun ones with you.
Fun would be one word to describe them. Yeah, there. I would say a prereq is alcohol is a requirement. Of
course,
those situations. There's definitely been some day drinking, unscheduled day drinking for those kinds of meet and greets. But dude, I mean, it's all the same shit. Like, it's like, oh, well, I've got a Cobra. It's like, oh no, you've got a Mustang Cobra. Like that's different.
What's the fastest you've ever been in a car?
Well, stuff like that. People ask. You get reasonable questions, but it's like for what we're doing. Well, for the biggest thing that I get is, oh, so I heard you race NASCAR. So that's just kind of one of those, like, it just gets under your skin a little bit. Like, no, IndyCar. Oh, right. NASCAR. No, IndyCar. Like, the Indy 500 is like, oh yeah. Do you do the Daytona 500 too?
Oh, my wife told me you were on your third job. That's cool.
Yeah, it's definitely. So that's kind of a thing. It's honestly, it's worse. The car part of it, I think, is worse. Like when somebody thinks you're a car guy.
Oh yeah.
Because that's just, there's such a, most of the time, honestly, when, somebody who, is race car, they find out you're a race car driver, like they just don't even know where to go with that kind of a lot of the time. So that ends up kind of being like, okay, either you're actually interested in it and now you get a little bit of the Drive to Survive thing, like, oh, like, Drive to Survive. And so you got to pick through that a little bit, like, oh, yeah, kind of, it's sort of like that. But here, let me just show you a picture on my phone.
The car guy thing, though, is worse.
The car guy thing, I think, is worse.
You're right.
For sure.
You are right. Because that is a clinger. You get stuck in the corner. It's like just off in the kitchen, like just outside the refrigerator.
Yeah.
And you were stuck there with that dude. And he's got it's like a 72 442. Or a Cutlass. It's a Cutlass it's a Cutlass with a 442 hood. Right?
Hey, the thing is,
Yeah.
is we, as a car community as a whole, all the way back out into space, looking at it, right? It is an inclusive environment, right? But when you zoom in, the car culture itself is so diverse, right? And at the same time, if you don't mesh perfectly with interest and stuff like that, just because you're into cars doesn't mean you're going to have similar interest about cars. You might have similar interest about all kinds of other things. We don't have to specifically talk about cars.
I have a great example for this, right? And this is applicable to this conversation because I've got my son skateboards, okay? And that's like the thing that we do. So me and my wife go out and I meet like the other skateboard parents, right? And I'm looking at this one dude and I'm like, I fucking know that guy. And my son is like skateboarding with his son. You know, they're 12 years old and he's looking at me and I can tell he's looking at me like, I know that dude. Well, I know him because he's on fucking TV, right? He's got a goddamn car show, right? And so we see each other like 10 or 15 times before the two of us are like, what's up, dude? And he's like, what's up, man? We shake hands and he's like, you're from the Roadster shop, right? I'm like, yeah, you're that Bob Blade dude, right? It's like, yeah. Like, you got that Roadster, don't you? It's like, yeah. You guys do some cool chassis. Yeah. That was the extent of the conversation. We see each other like once a week. We never speak of cars.
That's the best relationship there could ever be.
Oh, it is. It'll be like,
Straight up.
we see, I'm like, what's up, dude? We shake hands. And that's like,
Yep.
but it's the fucking dude that's got like the off the wall car that you don't want to hear about it. And it just goes on and on.
It's nothing to do with it. Like, we'll have a conversation. Let's talk about all kinds of other things. Let's talk about things that we maybe disagree on, but we could at least have a conversation on. Let's talk about music. Let's talk about all kinds of other stuff. But I don't want to hear about your stupid ass project. That's the thing I don't want to hear about.
They never have a project.
Well, it's a story. It's a thing. I've got this one. I'm driving on
Porsche
it.
box.
Yeah, I'm super into cars. You realize this one was this one was 12-time Dakar Rally winner.
Nobody's making,
Just for the record, I didn't bring that up. Okay.
nobody's making themselves very approachable here. So let's.
Yeah, well, we're all. This is nobody's listening anymore. Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh man, that's a great question.
I've been told that before. Thank you.
I can imagine. Best piece of advice I've ever received.
Don't go to MIT.
It worked out pretty good.
Go to MIT.
Nobody gave me that advice. That was probably the best piece of advice I ever received, but didn't take action on. Was you should just go to MIT. Like, what the hell are you doing? No, I mean, it's a little cliche, but I think, as I've gotten older and gotten deeper into my career, and you start to, come into your own a little bit more, is basically just that you have to understand for yourself, like, what it is that you really want to do and like what you want to get out of the experience of the thing that you've chosen to do and like that you're putting your energy into. Like, I think I got sucked in as a professional race car driver at times to being sort of enamored with some of the other parts of it, and you get really attached to the performance at the end of the weekend, like where you actually stacked up and all of those things. And it's like, it took me going through some shit as a race car driver and going through some, having the experience of that not always going well, and being attached to it and having that really affect, what I was like away from the track at times. Like, you get really hung up on, we just did shitty this weekend or whatever, weekend to weekend. And so I guess just, recognizing that really the enjoyment that I'm getting out of this, what I'm extracting out of this experience, is really just attached to whether or not I do my best work when I have the opportunity to do that, and focusing on that as the thing that's what I'm going to work on. Like, I'm not going to look at this as I've got to go run the fastest lap time. I'm going to look at this as I've got to go get the most out of myself when I get out track today. And that not only was like a huge, as simple as that seems, that was a huge shift in just my whole approach and like attitude about doing the thing that I was doing. But it enabled me to completely disassociate from all of the things that I'm not in control of, that end up affecting where you end up at the end of a race weekend or whatever else. So that to me was like if there was something that I wish I had known to do earlier in my career that I think would have allowed me to get even more out of it, that's it.
It's looking good.
Cool.
Really good. First car that you ever had, and a story about that car.
95 Firebird Trans Am. Kind of stole it from my dad.
Hold on.
I was in high school.
Don't tell us the color. 95. So I graduated in 98. WS6s. The worst ones were the white ones. Then you had the black and the dark blue.
Yellow.
He had the dark blue.
That's what I thought. That was what
You had the dark blue.
Black.
Black.
Ooh.
Black.
All right.
I saw it as dark blue as
Yeah.
well.
I had that thing. It was a car that I learned how to drive stick shift in because I had to go drive a race car when I was like 15 or whatever. And so drove that thing to learn how to drive a stick.
How'd you like that
or
skip
at a
shift?
license.
How'd you like that skip shift?
Fuck
We
the
had
skip
the
shift.
skip
the
shift
worst.
delete.
Oh, did you?
So
All right, good.
We were started on that. Still over revved the shit out of it, going that 2-3 shift a few times, just jamming it back into first when I was like first figuring the whole thing out. But because of course you just drive. I was racing go-karts at that point, so I just drove the thing like a race car. I was like revving it to $6,000 every time I shifted anywhere, just driving around town or whatever. But man, I never wrecked it. Like never got in. That was probably part of my dad realizing that I actually had some talent, was just never wrecking the Firebird. But that's oh man, we got into some serious shit in that thing.
Have you ever had a better drifting vehicle since then? That's the best drift vehicle that ever was made.
Phil?
I had
Fucking
99.
CTSV wagon, dude? Like,
Really?
It is, super legit because it's long wheelbase.
You get a hang
guess
out
you-
there.
You got good weight distribution, a little more oomph. It's been tuned up a tad, so that helps.
That LSA.
But,
Is that LSA or
that car was a great drift car, and that was also at the peak of like when I was driving that thing. It was like peak Formula D. I knew a bunch of those guys because they practiced up at Sears Point. Tyler McQuarrie and I don't know, a bunch of dudes that were race Formula Drift at that time. So, there was. I went through a lot of rear tires.
Factory wheels or torque thrusts on it?
No, not torque thrust. I ran better though. I just ran
Fixie.
spray canned factories for a while, and then when we built a new motor I blew the motor up in it. Shocker.
Of course.
We built this LT1 and kind of did like a light upgrade on the whole car. Bigger bars and bigger brakes and that kind of stuff. We put those like the ZR1 vet wheels on it.
Yeah.
After that, so maybe not my finest hour from a design choice perspective, but they looked the part at the time.
Exactly. Where are we at now? Best car movie and why?
Car movies is kind of a tricky one. I would say my head immediately goes to racing movies. Le Mans for me is just like the go-to. It's as much as it's not exactly true or it's fiction as much as anything else, much more so than Rush or any of the more modern stuff, Ford versus Ferrari, that kind of stuff. But I think it's just slow moving. It's like a real old movie, and with McQueen and knowing the backstory of how they made the movie back then, like they actually raced a car in those, like McQueen was actually driving the car in some of those races to get the nose cam, on the Porsche 908 to capture a lot of the action that they did. I think it's just such a quintessential, motorsport flick. Like I always, and I will say with the only caveat that the opening scene to Grand Prix to me is like the starting sequence of Grand Prix is just like so insane when they've got the split screens and it's the exhaust firing and it's kind of all to the percussive like note of the music. Like
it's like
those two to me
video pop art in a way
are the ones. Yeah.
Last but not least, I'm going a little rogue, a little wild card.
Whoa.
I wrote this down. I saved it for last. Okay. So if you don't want to answer this, it's too personal, no problem. We'll edit this out. You talked about earlier, you reach a place of zen, right? You've got to center yourself. You ask yourself the question, why are you doing what you're doing? What's the answer? What do you tell yourself when you're doing it? Why you're doing what you're doing? I'm very interested to know.
It's because like doing this thing that I've done for this long with sort of the, not to use this word lightly, but you develop whatever your level is, you kind of a degree of mastery doing like the thing that you have set out to do for a long period of time, that when you can get yourself in the place that you're really experiencing that level of like, I am just 100% one with the environment, this moment, like this thing that I'm doing, I'm 100% just experiencing this moment just as it's happening. Like I'm not tied up in something that happened like a couple of seconds ago. I'm not anticipating what's coming next at all. I'm just experiencing it all like right here, right now. And I think, you could experience that. I mean, I was working with a professional baseball player to understand some of this stuff. Like this is a feeling I think you can experience you could be in a boardroom and have this experience. You could build in a car and have this experience or whatever. But for me, it's like to do the thing that I'm super passionate about and that really physically like, it's a physical task. It kind of gets my juices flowing from that perspective. There's just nothing else that I have that total alignment and in the moment feeling like there's sort of just this absolute freedom that you get to by being in that moment, that just nothing else is even on your radar. Like nothing else matters at all. You completely free yourself of like everything you could possibly be concerned about, worried about that's going on in the world, like, going on in your life, whatever. And so it's to get to that feeling, that for me, like driving the race car and doing it at a really high level and being in those challenging circumstances that are really high stress, it's where you get the most out of, or where I get the most out of like being in that mode.
Now that you've learned that and you've got the muscle memory, can you get yourself there quicker and easier in every race? Yeah, for sure. And you can recognize like really quickly when you're not there too. So like, okay, now I got to like work some tools here to get back in it, instead of, a lot of, there've been other times where you kind of don't, you're not quite aware of it. So you don't quite realize that you're in a rush. You're like driving. It's funny. It's like you're from the outside, you are in a rush. Like you're every 10th of a second counts. You're trying to get to the next thing as fast as you can. But if you're in the mindset of thinking about it that way, then you're always anticipating something that you're not really in control of. And so you just get out of sequence, like out of phase with, no, you got to be like locked into just where the car is right now, what you're doing with it right now. And yeah,
build those moments together basically to create the, perfect lap. If that's a thing that exists. But
I think it's awesome. I think even for everybody listening that doesn't race cars, because I mean, obviously, believe it or not, most of the guys listening aren't professional race car drivers. I know it's hard to believe. But I mean, no matter what life throws your way, if you can learn the space you want to be in and then identify when you get outside that space, you can get yourself back inside that space faster. I mean, your shit's thrown your way all the time. I mean, it may be a bad fucking pit stop, but if you know that as soon as you get pissed off after that or whatever, and you're blaming on all these other things, you can get yourself back into the zone that you need to be in. I think it's vital for everybody. It's been fucking awesome, man. I know we've already established that your wife's not listening anymore because we found out the true reason of the Mitsubishi. I'm telling you what, in the last probably 3 or 4 months, your name has come up probably 24 times.
It really has.
You guys need to have JR Hill. You need to have and honestly, it's a lot in the female crowd. A lot of Sarah Lassick from Aeromotive. I mean, Courtney Hansen. I mean, getting texts all the time.
Lassick.
Hey, you need to have JR Hound. You need to have JR Hound.
You're not helping the whole wife situation right now.
I said she's not listening. We established that. He's a good looking dude. He's got long hair. He's a race car driver.
It's all good.
That's what it is.
Montero.
We need to do this again. We got to figure out a segment. Maybe it's Motorsport Mondays. I don't know what it's going to be or whatever. But I mean, seriously, it's been a fucking awesome. We had no idea what to expect. We have all kinds of guests. We've been doing this for a couple seasons now, and it's been really good.
Been a blast, dude. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Appreciate it, guys. Dude, same. Stoked and be happy to do it. Happy to do it. Happy to do it next week if you guys want to do it again. So
let's fucking do it. If you need a chassis, let me know. You know how to get in touch with us, and maybe we'll come down and check you out in Indy. It's only 3 hours away. Let's go down to fucking Indy 500.
Yeah, you guys got to. You're up in Mundelein, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I raced in 2007. There was a race team in Mundelein, Illinois.
What?
Newman Walks Racing.
Yeah.
Which was like an offshoot of the Newman Haas Champ Car team, which was like in the same general area, I think, outside of Chicago or something.
Right in our hood, we got a dude that used to work for them that's done some shock stuff for us, and another guy that's in our final assembly department. That
was on the pit crew.
That was on the pit crew, yeah.
I've been in the hood before.
Cool. Well, don't bother coming back out to Mundelein because there's nothing to see, but we would love to come see you at Indy, man.
Come out this time of year at least.
You need a chassis, let us know. We got to get you out here and do another in-person interview in studio. It's always better. And then we're coming to check out the Indy 500.
And then get you behind the wheel of something we built.
Oh yeah, we need to do that. For sure.
And I got like this is off record, I guess, but like there's a couple of things that I'm working on right now that are bigger programs, like maybe more along the lines of like producing a bunch of chassis for like startup kind of situations. But
that'd be rad, dude.
Definitely keen to have like a just understand a little more about what you guys do. I'd love to just come out and
dude, you need to
with you guys and
yeah. Come on out, man. We'd love
Let's
to
set
show
it
you
up.
around and chat.
Right on.
Thanks,
It's
dude.
been fucking awesome.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right, check you later.
All right.
Have a great rest of your night.
You too. Big thanks to JR Hildebrand. Remember, you can keep up with JR at JR Hildebrand on Instagram at JR Hildebrand. You can check out that fucking badass
Montero.
Mitsubishi.
It's pretty rad.
Telling you what, badass dudes don't really fucking care what they drive. That's kind of the takeaway.
It is.
You should stop.
Yeah, he marches to the beat of his own drum, man, and I dig it.
Yeah.
I like the car collection. The Caddy is wicked with the bike.
Do you notice every single picture of that Caddy has something on the roof? Either a mountain bike or a Christmas tree. Every single picture we've
But it looks cool.
He's using it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's time for whiskey review time.
I thought that was going to land right. In my mind, I pictured that landing right next to your glass. Like that.
Phil, what do we have here?
Just give me a little.
Yeah, just
because
little skosh.
That's hot, man. That is some hot stuff right there.
For a lesser man.
Well, when I first took a sip of that, I thought there would be something going on with the proof there, and then I glanced over to 124.7 proof.
Over the speed limit, for sure.
Yes, it is. Good stuff, though. Very high proof, man. Woodford, which...
Where did it come from?
It came from Matt Saxton.
Who?
Matt Saxton.
How would people know Matt Saxton?
We have built a couple cars, including the one on the wall right there for Matt. Great customer. Big whiskey aficionado. We've traded quite a few bottles back and forth. And
Never heard of him.
really, you're probably not getting any more bottles.
I've never got the first bottle. That's why I've never heard of him.
and you will not get any more in the future.
Yeah, Matt's fucking great, dude.
Yeah, solid dude. Good stuff. And
Tell you what.
I mean, Woodford can be confusing because when you mention Woodford, it's
Their regular stuff is
it's just good. It's fine.
go-to in a bar when you can't get anything else.
It's everywhere, right? It's almost like a Bacardi of the rum. It's really good, but it's you expect to see it there, so you don't always think of it as like if you're a whiskey connoisseur, you don't always gravitate to it.
Every year they do these. Was it Distiller Select, Master Distiller Select?
This is a Master's Collection.
Master's Collection.
Batch proof.
Close to that.
Batch proof. You know what batch proof means?
That's the proof of the batch. Yep.
Actually, not as stupid as it sounds. That is exactly the proof of the batch. They don't dilute it. They don't mix it. They don't do anything.
As it comes out of the barrel.
As it comes out. Almost like barrel proof. But batch proof is a lot of barrels poured in together, how they came out in the batch. Barrel proof, one barrel. But 124.7. That's 0.3 shy of 125 for the layman out there.
Hot stuff.
Hot fucking stuff, but man, it's good.
It is good. Really good. Woodford does have a tendency, if they're higher end stuff, it's usually
Surprises the fuck out of you.
usually pretty solid.
Yeah.
And this is right there with it. It's a sipper for sure. We probably oversipped it maybe a little bit.
Getting there.
Ish.
Getting there. It's only half a bottle.
Not for grown men like us.
That half a bottle hits a little differently than a lot of other half a bottles.
Because it's like 3/4 of a bottle at that proof.
Yeah.
But yeah, seeing the number on there at the 124.7.
Yeah, especially for a smaller guy like him. That's because you're smaller.
So
It affects you differently.
Proportional.
That's not a shot.
it's not a shot.
That's a good way of giving a shot while being able to say that it's not a shot.
You're smaller than me.
No, I think I'm way more than your frail ass at this point.
It's not nice. Batch proof, 124.7 proof. I have never had any of. I've had the. We had the Baccarat, Woodford.
Yes.
Right.
That was what I forgot. That was a Woodward.
This shit
Woodford.
right here, it really kind of took me by surprise. Wasn't expecting it.
I was a little scared going in and seeing that proof, thinking it'd be a serious burner, but
The proof, man.
Hey, the
shit.
proof is in the pudding. It tastes good. I'll say this, right? You take that high proof stuff, you put it next to like a George T. Stagg, which is high proof that everybody seeks out, and people spend a lot of money.
We're coming. We're doing George T. Stagg beginning of the year.
Okay, people
We're bringing it
spend
out.
north of $1,000
Yes, they do.
for that. George T. Stagg is sitting next to this bottle. I'm grabbing that bottle. Right, it's good. It's a good sipper. I quite liked it.
I liked it a lot.
Not real
We've been
sure.
having some fucking bangers lately.
Yeah,
in
I'm
whiskeys
not
world.
real sure where to rate it.
The only way to do it is to do it.
you got to give it a number.
Okay, just a solid straight number.
You could have a decimal point on there like they did.
I really, really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the flavor. I enjoyed the proof. There's nothing bad about it whatsoever. But again, I've been getting into the. I don't mind the burn. I don't even know what I've rated the last fucking 30 bourbons.
Try to take it down a notch.
You're pouring water in it.
Just a little drop. Open it up, as they say.
Some people say it. Man, this is difficult for a number. It really is. Not really. It's a 7.6.
Did that,
It's a 7.6.
that was the number.
That's your number?
That's where I was. That was the number in mine.
I'm going to go 7.7 just to keep the number on the bottle.
You said this was sent by John Blumenthal, right? Great customer. Had us out at his house. Did a lot of stuff for us. That was the customer you sent?
I said Matt Saxton.
Right.
But
Matt Saxon sends you guys a lot of shit. He didn't send me fucking nothing.
you're drinking it.
Tell you what. I've done a lot for old Matt.
What have you
Have you?
done? What have you done?
Maybe I haven't done that much for me. I don't know. Oh, Matt's a fucking great dude. Thanks for the Woodford Reserve Masters Collection. If you see this around, like you said, Woodford, I think, has gotten a bad rap.
And I wouldn't say a bad rap.
It's a
It's just
mainstream.
perceived as like average, which it's not. That's not bad because if that's what's at the bar, it's drinkable.
If you've came into the bourbon scene in the last 4 years, right? I bet you don't give Woodford the credit it deserves. That's a fair statement.
Yeah, I suppose.
Now, not the brand itself. There's some things out there, especially this one right there.
Like, these are only a once-a-year release, so it's like a Thanksgiving time deal, and they're rather hard to come by.
Jeremy gave it a 7.6. Phil gave it a 7.7. I gave it a 7.6, but I'm changing it. Look, I'm writing mine out. I'm going to do a 7.8 because I want to do 0.1 more than Phil.
Do you change yours?
No.
I'm leaving mine where it's at.
I'm a little higher than Phil now.
I feel like that was the review, and I think 7.6 was the review. It's a good ass bourbon, really is, and it falls under the buy it if you can get it, but
If you can find
you
it.
probably cannot. I'm guessing.
I'll tell you this. I'll go as far as this. If you can't drink this, you shouldn't be drinking bourbon. Not yet. Start at something else. This is something to aspire to. Get to the point where you like whiskey that you can drink this and like it.
Dude, I gotta be like, I think you're getting a little too brash.
For the
honestly.
proof?
You're just getting a little
the
too,
listener.
Yeah, for the listener. Yeah.
For the listener?
Well, even not the listener because they haven't been around. Like they're not behind the scenes. Like
Brash for who?
me. You know? Yeah. I think you're just getting like a little too hardcore. You got to be more inclusive, Josh. Right?
Hey,
Like
everybody.
not everybody.
all
Listen,
right,
like,
it's fine. I'll be inclusive.
be more inclusive because Buffalo Trace is phenomenal, right? You can jump in, sip it, enjoy it, put it on the rocks, right? It's better than drinking like a Cosmopolitan. We don't need to discourage people. Like that's a heater, okay? Aspire to drink it, sure.
That's what I said.
If that's the direction you want to go, but we should encourage the bourbon.
Hey,
community.
everybody, whatever y'all want to drink, come on in. We're open. Open to everybody. All people.
Yeah.
See? Look at that. Thanks for listening to Oil and Whiskey with the Roadster Shop. An Ironclad original. If you like the show, be sure to leave us a rating and review. If you like high proof, say thumbs up.
Where
If you like low proof, say thumbs up because we're inclusive.
we're inclusive. Where do you leave the review?
Down below.
I think that's where,
Yeah.
maybe down below.
Really?
Nobody
ever
leaves a
leaves
review anymore. Thanks again to JR. He really was that good.
Yeah,
I
it was
know
a good time,
Phil's going to
man.
give me shit after this because I said this really was a good one. But it really was.
It was a good one.
It was. We'll see you again next week.